Good morning. I'm Jane Thorne. I'm the Head of Category Management Services. And today we are joined by the University of Nottingham. We have Professor Zoe Todd, who's the Director of the Rights Lab. We've got Dr. Lisa Carroll, Commercial Director, Daniel Stapleton, who is Strategic Supply Relationship Manager, and Rosie Parkin, who's the Head of Procurement, all at the University of Nottingham. So in this session, we're going to get an overview of the work being done by the Rights Lab and how it feeds into the Slave-Free Campus programme. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa and the team. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do remember to use the Q&A function if you've got any questions, and we'll facilitate those towards the end. Thank you, Lisa.
Great. Thank you, Jane. We're really delighted to be here and talk about our Slavery-Free Campus work. We're here to share. We hope it's helpful. We're also really interested to learn from others to inform our work going forwards. So as Jane said, there's myself and three other colleagues. So I'm here as Commercial Director, but I also chair the University's Modern Slavery Act Working Group. In terms of what we're going to cover today, Zoe's going to start as Director of our Rights Lab. Zoe will give us some context around modern slavery today, but also the work of the Rights Lab. And then as myself, again, in that role as Chair of the Working Group, I want to share the journey we've come on in terms of how we're evolving our approach and taking action towards becoming a slavery-free campus. Then I'll hand over to Rosie, who's Head of Procurement at the University, to give more detail about the action and accountability that the procurement team have to deliver on their area of the blueprint towards a slavery-free campus. And then our other colleague, Dan, won't be presenting today, but is on hand during the Q&A. Dan, again, looks at our SRM programme, but is also a member of the working group and led the work around the supply chain risk analysis and how we're looking to engage our suppliers, particularly our strategic suppliers going forwards, to help us deliver on this work. So with that, I'll hand over to Zoe.
Thanks, Lisa. Next slide, please. As Lisa mentioned, I direct the Rights Lab. It's one of the University of Nottingham's 6 beacons of excellence, so the area where the university is really delivering world-leading research. I'm really excited that we get to talk to you today. I can see lots of institutions where actually we have research partnerships and joint work, including I think it's at Montfort and King's and Birmingham who are here. Next slide. We focus on research to help end modern slavery, and that's because there are 40 million people enslaved around the world today. So if you think about that number, this is a number that's larger than the population of Canada or Iraq or Malaysia or Australia. As an industry, it's worth about $150 billion a year in illegal profits to traffickers. The Home Office actually estimates that it costs the UK about 4 billion a year. So the costs that are sort of passed on to the economy in the UK by modern slavery here. About 130,000 people are enslaved here in the UK. So that's within that global figure of 40 million. About 70% of enslaved people are female, about 25% are children globally. And these people are enslaved in a variety of different forms, but maybe most importantly for thinking about supply chains, about 50% are in forced labour. So they're in agriculture and industry, they're in carpet looms and stone quarries, brick kilns, fisheries, mines, deforestation, construction. And then 38% are in forced marriage, which involves actually both labour and sexual exploitation, and 12% are in forced sexual exploitation. Next slide, please. So that's just some of the numbers. And thinking about numbers, I always think we have to be quite precise about definitions. So what is it that we're talking about? And I think it's just important to be clear that when talking about slavery, we don't mean extreme poverty. We don't mean sweatshop labour. Enslaved people today are paid nothing. They're forced to work against their will. They can't walk away. We work with the Bellagio-Harvard guidelines. That starts with the UN definition, which comes from the 1926 Slavery Convention. It's up on the screen. And it talks about ownership. But obviously, as legal ownership isn't asserted today by slaveholders, you know, slavery is technically illegal everywhere. These guidelines imagine that we can understand ownership as possession. So slavery is controlling a person like you might control a thing. It's the condition of treating another person as if they are property, something that you can sell or trade or destroy. Next slide. So slavery still exists, but so does anti-slavery. So this movement that's been showing us that a world without slavery is possible. It's about 20 years old as a movement, and it's definitely achieved some successes. We've had prosecutions, we've had increased public awareness, we've had new legislation. So here in the UK, the Modern Slavery Act became law in 2015. You'll all be familiar with this. It requires organisations with budgets over 36 million a year to report annually on the action that they're taking to tackle slavery in their supply chains and in their operations. And this includes companies, the public sector now, universities, and some of the requirements for that act are up on the screen. As well, the new aim of the global community is to end slavery by 2030. So this is part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. 193 countries adopted this in 2015. Its target 8.7. So we really hit our tipping point in 2015. The global anti-slavery effort really now squarely on the world agenda and here in the UK. We started to build the Rights Lab around that time because we could see that that movement that had been around for about 20 years actually was doing quite a lot of short-term thinking. So there was not much robust, long-term evidence-based strategizing for ending slavery. And for us, that meant researchers and universities, educators had a really key role to play in tackling slavery as a global challenge. So we built here at Nottingham the world's first really large-scale research platform for ending modern slavery, just trying to underpin all these efforts towards 2030 with really rigorous research. So we work to deliver what we call a freedom blueprint, a global plan for how to end slavery, a plan about everything that needs to happen at all levels, individuals, communities, business, governments, intergovernmental organizations to achieve a slavery-free world. Next slide. We're home now to the world's largest and leading modern slavery research group, a team here on our campus of about 80 researchers. And that team works across 5 main programs on data, communities, ecosystems, law, and business. And they're working really to answer some big questions with their research. Next slide, please. I've put the questions up on the screen. How many people are enslaved and where are they? Why does slavery still persist? And what factors would underpin resilience to slavery? How is environmental change interconnected with slavery? How do we close the implementation gap? So that gap between policy and even law and practice. So what happens on the ground? What are the impacts of slavery in our economies? How can business tackle slavery? And of course, overarching everything, the big question, what works to end it? And we built the Rights Lab and its research programs around those questions. Next slide, please. I just want to tell you really briefly, I promise, about those programs and about some of our flagship work, about some of our discoveries. So some of the discoveries we've made recently are that we can see at least 40% of the world's slavery from space using satellites, that slavery is actually the 3rd largest emitter of CO2 in the world after China and the United States, that the terrorist organization ISIS was almost entirely financing its activities through slave sales. And there's a few other recent discoveries up on the screen. Next slide, please. Those discoveries are coming out of our 5 programs, for example, from our data and measurement program. So this is asking about how many people are enslaved and where they are. This is home to our really flagship Slavery from Space project. It's the first use of geospatial technology to map slavery from space. We use satellites to detect slave labor in everything from brick kilns and mines to deforestation. And we work with governments and NGOs to really help them target interventions based on these new maps. Next slide. Or our program on law and policy, which is trying to close that gap between principle and practice in how we govern around slavery. One of its flagship outputs is a really massive database of every country's law on slavery, forced labor, human trafficking, related exploitation. And we announced when launching this at the United Nations recently that in fact, half of the world's countries have not yet criminalized slavery. So slavery, of course, illegal in international law, but there's still no way to prosecute someone for enslaving a human being in half of the world's countries. So that means we're working on better model legislation and law, country by country. Next slide. Our third program on ecosystems, which is working on the issue of environmental change and its connections with modern slavery. It's measuring how modern slavery contributes to climate change, to environmental destruction. Our current big project on slavery at sea, so trying to understand slavery on board fishing vessels and in ports. Next slide. Our business and economies program, asking how can businesses tackle slavery? How does slavery impact our economies? This focuses a lot on supply chains, working really closely with business to really see and tackle slavery risk in operations. We have a flagship risk barometer for business that works country by country, commodity by commodity. Next slide. And finally, our communities and society program. So this is really identifying the most effective kinds of policy in varying local contexts. So this is the program that designed a process by which Nottingham could work to be a slavery-free city. This is working closely with local government, law enforcement, NHS, business, and now has rolled out that model of a slavery-free city around the country and actually internationally. Next slide. So I could talk obviously for a long time about these discoveries and the programs, but I just want to say instead that what Lisa is about to tell you is actually one of the things that I'm most proud of. So when we started to design the idea of a slavery-free city or community, we knew that ideally this would have to apply to universities as well as communities. And the more that we worked, the more I hoped that our campus, University of Nottingham in the UK, might also take up this issue, might be able to lead itself across all of its operations and supply chains on this really great human rights issue of our time. So I wondered basically, what if we could be a slavery-free campus? Next slide. And I just want to finish before handing off to Lisa by saying I hope that as not just a professor, but also as an abolitionist, as an anti-slavery leader in this movement, I've worked on this issue of modern slavery for 20 years. And I do think that if there was ever a tipping point where we could actually end slavery, it's now. This is something I think on the brink of its own extinction. Tipping it over the brink is possible. So we have this chance really to achieve a really watershed moment, achieve a slavery-free world after 4,000 years of slavery-tainted human history, and just reject once and for all that great lie of history, which had told us that some people are subhuman. And we can embrace a great anti-slavery truth that labour should not be forced and that people are not for sale. Thank you. Next slide, and over to Lisa.
Thanks, Zoe. It's always slightly difficult following Zoe, but I shall do my best. What I wanted to cover now is, after that fantastic overview and introduction, and you see the capability in-house that we have at Nottingham through Zoe's Rights Lab, is bring it back to what is the university as a Modern Slavery Act working group doing? What's the journey we've been on? So on this slide, I'm trying to show where we've come from the introduction of the Modern Slavery Act in 2015. Because although hopefully you'll see through this presentation that we are clear on our ambition and our plan now, that wasn't always the case. So when the Act came in, we did respond to that. So we put in a policy at the university around modern slavery and human trafficking. We set up a working group and we started issuing our annual statements. And we did that, subsequent years. And if you look at those statements, they are compliant, but it's really quite a basic level of compliance. And when I joined the university in 2019, I was asked to chair the working group, and then linking in with Zoe and understanding what the Rights Lab were doing and more about what the opportunity and possibilities were, it was clear we needed to do more and we should do more. And so it was, again, a sort of tipping point ourselves in 2019 about, we know we need to do more, but we need a vision. We need to understand where we want to get to and why. But also at that point, there was what I would refer to as a catalyst. So Amelia, who was a PhD student in the Rights Lab, was just finishing some fantastic research into work that was going on across 160 UK universities in terms of what they were doing around modern slavery, but also what they could do around modern slavery action. And Amelia came to present to us as a working group, and the sort of outputs of that research were a framework for what we could do to take action. And so this was really helpful because now we were sort of gathering around this vision, but also, you know, a path forward. And we've worked on that. And what you'll see if you look up our statements from 1920, but also particularly this year, we now consider ourselves, you know, delivering above basic compliance and actually moving towards what we would like to think is a more leading position in line with what we feel we should be doing. Next slide, please. So what I've laid on this slide is what I think our ingredients are to enable us to be successful in what we're trying to do. And to be honest, these are fairly applicable to any team, but I'll talk about them obviously with respect to the working group in this instance. So first of all, as a team, we needed to clarify what our vision was, where we were trying to head to, but also why we were doing it. So what was our purpose? So we were clear and we agreed that actually we should align the ambition of the working group with the ambition of the Rights Lab. And so that was very clear to us. And secondly, in terms of and why, it was to leverage our capability, combined capability, to contribute to solving a global challenge. And that's one of the goals in the University of Nottingham strategy. And then at the bottom of that sort of square, we've laid out our ambition over time. Now, I just want to be clear here, this isn't about sort of winning any prizes. When we're saying about taking a leading position, it's because we've recognised what we're capable of delivering if we leverage that in-house capability and our combined team efforts, and therefore taking a responsibility to do that. And that's what that represents. The second point is, you know, the vision and the ambition was great, but it can be a little bit overwhelming given where we were at that point. So we needed to break down the journey into manageable steps. And that's where the 38 steps towards a slavery-free campus is now in place to help us do that. And I'll touch a bit more on that on the next slide. Thirdly, it was all very well having the working group, but we needed overt sponsorship if we were ever going to deliver this effectively and sustainably within the university. So we took a paper to the University Executive Board to lay out our ambition and our plan to work towards being a slavery-free campus, and had that signed off in January 21. Then we recognised, step 4, that we didn't have quite the right team to deliver the plan, because we didn't have all areas of the supply chain in terms of cash flow in and out of the university represented. And once, in addition to that, we needed the right accountability signed up by those team members. So that was the next point. And then finally, we needed to measure delivery and progress. And so we have the 38 steps, but again, just on a sort of a tactical detail, each of those steps, we have a scoring method from 0 to 4. And we are effectively assessing our progress by scoring where we are each year on 0 to 4 against those 38 steps. Now we're sort of marking our own homework, but we are going to work with our internal audit team to validate our scoring approach over time. But as the team now, we have planned where we want to get to in terms of overall scores by the end of this year. We've actually mapped it out to 2025. So we know where we want to get to each year. And again, we've broken down the challenge into a manageable plan. Next slide, please. So just a comment about evolving from Amelia's research into the 38-step blueprint to a slavery-free campus. We started with that research, and again, this is all accessible, and you're able to review all that in detail, and I encourage you to do so. So out of Amelia's work came that framework in terms of steps universities can take to take action. But I think aligned with our vision to be leading not just within the university sector, but across public sector and wider, in line with commercial organisations as well, we knew we needed to perhaps take a broader view of what we could be doing to inform our work. And so we looked and benchmarked across a range of MSA indexes, some of those shown here, including commercial organisations such as Marks and Spencer's, who have a really great toolkit to guide suppliers on identifying and mitigating risk of modern slavery in their supply chains. And so we used that to build out these 38 steps. And then the final point, if you look through the 38 steps, and again, it's all freely available, it's all included in our current year's statement, we've customised the language so it speaks to our circumstance, so it speaks to HE. So it talks about staffs and students. And so hopefully when you look at it as a university institution as well, it'll speak to your organisation too. Next slide, please. So in terms of building the right team, I said we looked at the supply chain, or if you like, the flow of money through the university, and we've built the right team around that to align it. So for example, if we look at money into and funding into the university, we have teaching fees, so we have a member of the Students' Union on the working group now. We have research grants, so we have a member from our research and innovation team. We have fundraising, so we have a membership from our campaign and alumni relations office, which is Caro. And then finally, we have the commercial income, which obviously I represent as commercial director. And then in terms of money flow out of the university, it goes on to staff pay. So we have membership from HR. It goes into our investment funds, and I link with my colleagues in finance over commercial to cover that area as well. And then it goes out into our supply chain. And so we have members from procurement on the working group, but then also particular areas of higher risk in that supply chain. We have a member from our estates team who looks after construction, and we have a member of the estates team who looks after accommodation and catering. And then finally, on the bottom left, supporting across this, we have a member from our legal team, and also Zoe and her head of operations from the Rights Lab. Next slide, please. And so what I've just speaking to accountability, because I think that's really key in actually getting progress delivered. This is just an extract from a few areas from those 38 steps. So on the left, you see we cover different areas within the blueprint, governance policy, down to civic agenda and some example questions. But over on the right, you'll see the members or the membership of the team of the working group and where they're accountable for delivering against that particular point. And so again, where we've committed over from this year over to 2025 in terms of progress, each of the team members has their own effective action plan where they're looking to progress over time to deliver that. Next slide, please. And this is just the final slide for me. The final point I wanted to say is I think you need to align the communication of your results to your ambition. I think if your ambition is to really drive change, and in order to do that, you do need to engage within your organisation really effectively, but also within your supply chain to customers and suppliers and other stakeholders. I think how you communicate, you shouldn't underestimate the effect and impact of that, making it sure it's as professional and as ambitious as your actual content to make sure you engage people really effectively. And on the left is our statement from 1920 year, which although the content was good, looks a little bit sad, to be honest, and we weren't particularly proud of how we were presenting it. On the right, we have done some work to improve how we're professionalising and effectively communicating our work. And so that's the statement we just published last month from the 2021 year. I'll admit we had a bit of statement envy, and we're particularly looking at Manchester University. So we've looked at where we think universities have done this really well, or in the commercial sector, and use that to inform how we're communicating our work. But again, I use it as a point, but I don't underestimate the impact of this piece. So now I just want to hand over to Rosie.
Thanks, Lisa and Zoe. Good morning, everyone. My name's Rosie Parkin. I'm head of procurement here at the University of Nottingham. Just wanted to share with you the steps that we've taken over the last couple of years to support a slavery-free campus. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So over the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk to you about how we've optimised our supply chain and prioritised our approach so far. So I won't go into detail on those points just yet. But currently, we're in the process of developing our responsible procurement strategy and policy. So this is across all areas of corporate social responsibility, sustainability, social value, slavery, SME and local, and also equality, diversity and inclusion. So what we've been doing is we've been connecting with our experts across the university community to align our goals with that of the university and also with those of the UN SDGs, and actually combine our efforts and take really practical steps to make a difference. Next slide, please. We're looking to launch that in 2022. So where did our journey start? So when I joined in 2019, we had a really complex supply base. We had about 12,000 suppliers, which we worked really hard to reduce over the last couple of years. And we've actually got that down by about 40% to around 7,000. Now, our goal as procurement is to manage the risk in the supply chain. And therefore, we needed to ensure that the supply chain was actually a controllable size to allow us to manage it. So these are some of the actions that we've taken. Obviously, initially implemented automated removal of suppliers with no expenditure over 2 years. We've reviewed that recently, and we're actually going to increase that to 3 years based on analysis of how many suppliers we reopen and also looking at our tender pipeline and when contracts end. In the medium term, we've done quite a lot of work in terms of consolidation of our tail end spend. So prior to 2019, the procurement team's remit was to look at after those contracts above 100k. We've now taken that down to 25k. So in terms of analysing all the expenditure in that area, there's a wealth of opportunities to actually consolidate that and bring the requirements together across the university into more manageable contracts. This helps us to manage that risk as there's fewer suppliers to manage. So in addition to this, we've done a range of other measures to prevent that supply base creeping up. We've implemented Amazon Business, we've refreshed our purchase card policy, and we've created better guides to our central contracts to make sure stakeholders don't divert from those. Next slide, please. Thank you. So once our supply chain had been stabilised, our SRM manager, Dan, actually conducted a risk assessment based on the SUPC commodity coding analysis. Sorry, previous slide, please. Thank you. And then we overlaid our spend data on top of that to create priority areas. So you can see there, anything that's been identified as high modern slavery risk. We've also looked at the number of suppliers and the level of spend, and where those category areas are seen as high across those 3 areas, then we're enhancing our procurement approach in terms of questions. Next slide, please. So this slide really summarises our progress in terms of mitigating risk in the supply chain. You can see there in the top right, there's a small guide to maturity assessment. So, you know, without wanting to sound like I'm on X Factor, but we are on a journey. You know, we don't start off perfect. And in 2019-20, the work that we started doing was good, but we were still at a level 1 in terms of maturity. Now, you may note along the bottom where those levels are stated, there's a little question mark, and that's because we want to validate that maturity assessment with our internal audit team, which we're doing at the minute. So what we did in 2019-20 is we worked with our legal colleagues to ensure that anti-slavery clauses were inserted into all our standard terms and conditions. We also made sure that the standard SQ modern slavery questions were in all our tenders. And then following on from this, in 2021, we conducted the supply chain risk assessment. We looked at our pipeline and identified priority areas for that year. And then we worked with the Rights Lab to develop some really great questions to actually help mitigate that risk when we were taking on these big tenders like lab consumables, which is huge in terms of value, and also number of suppliers, as well as some real large scale construction frameworks as well. In addition to this, we also inserted ethical investment into the retendering of our investment contract as well, which was a really great result. Now, this year, we are just about to launch our code of conduct and use that in all tenders in terms of how we want to work with suppliers and our expectations of how we expect suppliers to work with us. In addition, we're enhancing our capability with contract management. We're just about to award a new procurement system, which will give enhanced capability in order to do that. And we've also launched a corporate supply relationship management program, which has been fantastic in terms of securing that high level stakeholder buy-in. It will also enable us to better manage those really high priority supplier relationships and ultimately to mitigate risk. That's our work so far, and we expect it to continue to evolve over the next 3 to 5 years. Thank you very much. Back over to Lisa.
Next slide, please. And this is just the final summary slide. So, this is the work we're doing at the university towards being a slavery-free campus. And hopefully you've seen the way to get to that was about being clear about our ambition, building the right team that's committed and enabled to deliver change, getting that sponsorship in place, which is really key, but then also developing this practical roadmap that we now have to follow. So we hope that's helpful. And again, I reiterate, part of the reason we like to share this work is so we can learn from others and prompt questions or just build our network so we accelerate work as a sector. Thank you.